In 2023, a French-Canadian thriller directed by Pascal Plante released to rave reviews. And now, in 2024, it's finally made its way to the United States. That film is called Red Rooms. And today, I'm thrilled to be sitting down with the director, Pascal Plante, and the two stars of the film, Juliette Gariépy and Laurie Babin, who play Kellyanne and Clementine, respectively.
Que seront dévoilées les troublantes vidéos saisies par le FBI. Les preuves clés qui ont mené à l'arrestation de Ludovic Chevalier.
Ce qu'on va tenter d'établir ici, c'est que Ludovic Chevalier est l'auteur de ces meurtres, qu'il a filmés pour un auditoire privé, prêt à payer pour voir ça en direct, dans ce qu'on appelle des Red Rooms.
Qu'est-ce qui vous a motivé à assister au procès?
J'étais curieuse. J'en profite, j'ai un petit mot à dire à ces groupies. Ben, on vous voit. Vous devriez avoir honte!
Ok, mais toi, t'es-tu genre une mannequin full célèbre ou genre une joueuse de poker full riche?
Regarde la balle. Et vas-y! Je tiens donc à m'excuser pour ce que je vais vous infliger.
Je demande à tous ceux et celles qui ne sont pas concernés de bien vouloir quitter la salle d'audience sur le champ.
Le deuxième. Attends.
C'est que ce gars-là, il travaillait tout seul.
First and foremost, love the film. And the first piece of feedback I saw for the movie was a Letterboxd review that says, this movie shows nothing, but it feels pure evil. And I wanted to ask you first and foremost, Pascal, for crafting the film, how do you balance the tightrope between showing too much and going into the kind of, extreme violence and showing too little to where it feels like nothing happened and we've been waiting for this payoff to happen that never comes?
Yeah, well, if only according to my taste, when I'm watching genre films, horror films, I tend to lean way more and connect way more with the more atmospheric side of horror genre films than, like, let's say, the more in-your-face, blunt proposition. And the film, I mean, this is my first foray into thriller horror, let's say. So I have a healthy cinephilic diet where I watch tons of things, not just specifically genre films and horror. So I'm not like a hardcore craving this and also shaping it for that audience alone. But I think it's just, when I was writing the film, it was during the pandemic first. And secondly, I got into that rabbit hole of like YouTube of true crime and just like a lot of documentaries, and I was kind of binging it to the point where it felt weird even on me. So I tried to convey a screenplay and a film ultimately that gets you in a weird place, more so than just, I guess, regular horror film that tries to, I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry, I kind of, I did a few today, so maybe my brain's a bit mushy. But showing too much, I try to be ethical about it on the one hand, but on the other hand, make a satisfying thriller. So there's a balance there, because for me as a filmmaker, it's also fun to quote unquote flex your muscles and to play a lot with sound, rhythm, editing, the music, all the toolbox that the filmmaker can have to make a satisfying object, genre film. And yet I didn't want a film that glamorizes the killers themselves or that indulges in graphic violence. But I wanted it to be unsettling too. So anyways, it's a mixture of all that. Yeah.
It certainly was unsettling. And this raised a good question, Juliette and Laurie, for you approaching this. you're kind of the embodiment of the true crime craze. And a lot of that really took off during the pandemic. People listening to more true crime podcasts, watching, YouTube channel videos about true crime. Were the two of you going into this as people who enjoy true crime yourself and you're kind of examining yourself stepping into it? Or were you like starting from ground zero, researching that interest?
Actually, I was very interested in true crime when I was a lot younger, like in high school, I would say. But kind of quickly, I kind of got sick of it. So like all of those like videos that leaked at some point, like I never watched those. And so honestly, it was kind of a hard homework for me to get like into that mindset of like true crime and stuff, just because I don't feel comfortable giving so much attention and so much like energy to criminals and like true crime stuff. So yeah, it was definitely a hard balance for me to find. So yeah, but I would say that like my interest in true crime definitely since like doing Red Rooms has changed. Not that like it has completely vanished, just because like I think human nature is just like we get easily interested in those kinds of like evil stuff. But I definitely have more of a critical distance towards it, and I think that true crime can be made in a way that's like smart and critical and interesting. But I think it's definitely not all true crime is made equal. So
right. Yeah, I agree. And Juliette, what about you? What was your approach?
Yeah, I agree with Laurie, but it's curious because I never was really into anything slasher, anything killer victim, like the classic true crime of like he hid 3 bodies and that was not but I listened a lot of true crimes, but about psychological abuse and like marrying someone you end up not knowing at the end, and something like much more scary in my opinion. I used to listen to a lot of that, like all the time, like falling asleep to it. And I did change my practice in the last years. Like I think I grew more anxious and I got more attuned to like what makes me feel good. And like it was stressing me out. So I kind of cut it off. But I think what's interesting with podcast, the usual form of podcast, is like, okay, so we start with the like victim and we grow and we end up with the big murder and trying to dissect it. And that's the usual narrative. But what we had with Red Rooms is like the murder's already been done, and what we're dissecting is the aftermath and the victims and who's around these people, who's around the killer, who's watching the killer, rather than just like, oh, this magnificent killer who is so smart and have a genius mind and can kill so many people. That's the Maniota thing that happened. They did this whole Netflix series, and I watched it, and I didn't like how they put his genius brain on the table. And it's like, yeah, but what about anyway? It's a lot, and yeah, no, I don't really.
But if I can jump on just that, like I did do lots of research, obviously writing a screenplay, and research extended to me watching even more than what I would normally watch, and it did a couple things on me. Well, it's almost like you eat too much junk food. Like it can, it tastes good, but at the end you never feel satisfied. You never feel satisfied if you watch like 4 hours of a show about a narcissistic killer. Like you might just get caught up in it, but there's nothing nourishing for the soul at all in there. And so that was kind of one thing that depressed me. But also it's just how little attention is given to the victim. This is really, really, really what obviously we're playing with the film, because the film does have the tag serial killer and will attract, I think, potentially the audience based on that fact. But the way we treated the killer, the way we didn't want to give him any more attention than he deserves. Because at the end of the day, when, let's say, somebody like Magnotta has a show, he wins because he made purely vain and he's a narcissistic person, and now he has his own show. So in a way, even though he's behind bars, he won. And we all collectively, we let him win by watching these shows. Anyway, so like Laurie said, not all true crimes are created equal. There's a lot of exploitative stuff in there. So I'm extremely critical of that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm curious, going back to you, Juliette, with approaching this character, the character doesn't wear her emotions on her sleeve, and her motivations aren't really known through much of the film. And even leaving the film, there's some motivations that are left unseen. How much motivation did you get to see in the script that informed your decisions, and how much did you create a backstory for that character?
The information that is in the script that defines the character is more like symbols that I feel like relate to superpowers or like superhero, because she's blocking out, like you said, anything that's emotional, which is what allows her to go there and take the information and come back. And it's kind of unreal. Like normal humans have emotions and are unable to go through with the violence, or anyway, something happened maybe that made them like this. And that was the big question with Pascal, like, oh, we're not going to give her a trauma that equals her behavior and the path that she's carrying. And we're not going to put her into that like classic, oh, but I played too many violent video games when I was young, or I got, abused when I was young, and which is probably what I thought of Kellyanne. Yeah, she did. I feel like what I built it was more something like she seen too much, and now it just takes her a little more to get it going, to have a thrill. And I feel like I'm the same with my phone. I'm addicted to watching it, and I need more each time to fill my little bottle. And it's like, oh, my attention span is shorter. I'm gonna need more. Where I relate to her in that sense, that yeah, we get addicted, and then we need adrenaline. We need to have fun. That part I get, but I feel it's hard. It's interesting that for once, the violence that comes from this female character is not directly linked to her being a victim, and it can just be rage or like wanting to be near something powerful like violence. Like we see, all those powerful men having killed women, but being put on that pedestal. It's normal for us to wanting to access, that power, because we don't have it. So we look up to those powerful men, even when they did something awful. So I get her fascination with power, that I can understand. I think we just have different levels. Her standard is just way higher, but I relate to that need to be powerful and to exist. But I don't see her as a full human also. Like I did have that perception of the character like a fictional story, and it's very embedded in reality, but it's more like a super human to me, or like someone, a story, a myth, or like a witch. Of course we have all those thoughts, but yeah, how she wakes up at the beginning of the movie and we don't see her at the end. Like it could have never happened. Was she real? Was she even there? Yeah. So I kind of like that, to keep it in the fictional, because some people even told me after seeing the movie, it's like they have all the positive effects of a psychosis, but not the bad ones, with like my character, which I don't think is the actual representation of the world. So I don't see it like, oh yeah, she went through that, so that's why she's crazy like that. No, it's a story, but yeah, we are all changed by what we see, and we see a lot. So yeah. we are like her.
But both Juliette and Laurie, you didn't have any judgment. You defend these characters. I feel like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but both of you approach, I think, this character with trying to understand her and almost defend them in a way with the way you played them.
Yeah. Well, and I have another podcast I do that is true crime related, but I've always been from the perspective of victims. And so I have a lot of strong opinions about the true crime world and the obsession. And I really looked at the character of Clementine in this realm of like the naivete you have when you first start diving into this. You mentioned you were younger, when you were interested in true crime. So I think you channeled some of that into that character, where you're fascinated to be there. You're in the courtroom, you're seeing these things. And then you have Kellyanne, who is jaded and has seen so much and has been at this, for so long. You relate to the characters, and at times you're sickened that you relate to some of these moments, and that at other times you don't know what to even do with it. You walk away going, okay, there's a lot to think about here. I am curious to ask a somewhat spoiler question at the end here. So anybody listening, they can tune out here if they want to. But I'm really curious what your thoughts were in those final sequences, because it seems like the moment where, that final piece of evidence is dropped off, it could be viewed as a redemptive moment for the character of Kellyanne. And I don't know how I feel about that. I've been wrestling with that since I watched the movie. Do I see her as a heroine type in this film? Do I see this as an ending that is more ambiguous than that? What were your approaches respectively going into that? Pascal, starting with you.
Yeah, and I'll let Juliette also, because I'm interested in Juliette and Laurie's take on it. But for me, people focus because this is the one tangible thing, like the piece of evidence that she gives at the end, which can be viewed. It's sadistic, and yet it is kind of a good action.
Yes.
So people focus a lot on that. But for me, the real mindfuck, dare I say, is the shot right before where she takes a selfie for herself in the dressed as the ghost of the girl in her bedroom. This is very creepy. So I think the dissonance between these two things is the lingering effect that this character, like the puzzle is not yet solved because you have a juxtaposition of two contradicting shots that keeps the riddle alive of that character alive in a way. So I think, and Juliette, you can expand on it, but I think the character is also very motivated. She's very selfish in a way. A lot of the things she does, the way she was written, is she also evolves according to her own dark fantasies and how she's going to pursue them till the end. It's almost a collateral damage that she ends up becoming this almost super heroine in a weird way. So, but there would be more to say, but I think this is the dissonance between her being extremely selfish and indulging in her fantasies and her doing what she ultimately does at the end. That is the riddle.
Yeah, I agree with this. And I agree with this and the duality that like she's going through with her fantasy or her needs or her need to be seen ultimately maybe by this community, this secret community, because the final picture is like the proof of it. And it's like she doesn't exist, she doesn't have friends, she doesn't have family, she doesn't have a job, but she exists in this secret community
online. Yeah.
And to have that picture in that room is like a symbol. It's very powerful. But then also to leave a clue, the final clue to the mother will lead to like press being released and like the story being continued. And maybe it's also just a way to exist in that story. You know, when you're going to Google it, oh, someone left a clue. It adds to like her existing in that digital world. Yes. And also, I think it's great that we have this duality that like, yeah, she's not just evil. She also met the woman, saw her sufferance and decided to give her the final clue. And I agree with these characters that aren't just evil or good. And mostly what I've seen with female characters is like, it's a good girl, the mother, the savior, or the evil witch a siren that will hypnotize, and take. And now we have something more like complicated, which I agree with that. Yeah, I want to hear Laurie too, so I won't speak too much.
To me, well, I guess it's a bit similar to what Pascal and Juliette already said, but to me, it's her way of like inserting herself in the narrative, and there's something almost like owning it. Like I'm not sure what, like it almost like it could be a reaction to her actual fear of like killers, of like being a woman in this world, and she's really like owning it, and she becomes like a part of the story. Like she gets the last clue, she gets a video, she gets like into the house of one of the victims. So there's something like of like, yeah, like just like trying to insert herself in a narrative, and that also like could relate to like the fascination we have for killers. That's like similar to the fascination we have for famous people or like for artists, where like you want to be them kind of, but Kellyanne wants to be like what kind of wants to know how it feels to be the victim in that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Pascal, when you mentioned her taking the picture, I literally got full body chills because that moment's so unsettling, and it leaves you again. I love the collateral damage mention, because I think that is a perfect way to put it, is like she helped but also did it in a way that inserts her into the narrative. So there is that double meaning where her intentions to herself are probably not fully understood.
And just quickly, so this is kind of the ending of Kellyanne, and she even visually kind of disappears as she appeared at the beginning of the film in an almost magical way. So Kellyanne, as Juliette mentioned a little bit, but like she's a bit otherworldly, and that's completely that's also fun to play with. So she started and very rooted in research, in actual research about people who are turned on by horrible crimes, people who gravitate towards killers themselves. But eventually, the fun of the film was to make her that ghost-like, that spectral presence. Whereas Clémentine, she remains rooted in reality, and she also finds her redemption somehow, even though we lose her and there's a big ellipsis, and then she comes fully transformed. But she has the last words of the film, and I think the last words are very telling of where my heart is and the film's heart is in regards to the victims, that widespread obsession about killers, and the women themselves who, at one point, well, women and men, but I know statistically it's mostly women, which still boggles my mind. I don't know why. People obsessed with true crime, I mean. But she does step out of it, in a way, and she has the last word. So I think it was important for me to have a redemption for the both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's amazing. I'm still thinking about those scenes like weeks later and trying to think about what I think about every moment in the film. It was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for answering a couple of questions. I know you've got a lot more press to do probably. So stay sane through that process. And thanks again.
Merci.
Thank you so much. That was so fun.